Well, we have a special guest with us this hour with some really grave news. Steve Kirsch, since day one's been exposing how dangerous and evil these so-called vaccines have been, the mRNA, all of it. Steve Kirsch is a philanthropist and executive director of the COVID-19 Early Treatment Fund and also the Vaccine Safety Research Foundation. He is the inventor of the optical mouse and one of the first internet search engines, InfoSeek. He has founded 7 high-tech companies with billions and billions in dollar market caps. Steve is currently focused on safe and effective ways to deal with our problems without all these poisons. He received a BS, MS in electrical engineering, computer science from MIT in 1980. He's also been featured 60 Minutes and everything else you can imagine, and testified before Congress, you name it. SteveKirsch.substack.com, Twitter, ST Kirsch, KIRSCH. And it's just incredible, not just the insurance actuaries that have been out for years and all the other numbers and global life expectancy dropping, particularly where the shots are rolled out, or the government databases that have come out proving all of it from New Zealand to the United States. And then now all the big developments with RFK Jr. overall doing a lot of really good things, but also big pushes to roll out more COVID shots that I know he's trying to block by making them actually study it. But this new study by a very respected MIT scientist is out. Pfizer recipients face 37% higher risk of death than Moderna recipients. Well, we'd always heard that Moderna was stronger in the same thing as the Pfizer. Very interesting. Study of 1.47 million Florida adults by MIT scientist and Surgeon General finds significantly higher all-cause cardiovascular and COVID-19 mortality after Pfizer vaccinations. So this is the Surgeon General of Florida with all the government resources coming out with this. The study titled 12-month all-cause mortality after initial COVID-19 vaccination with Pfizer, BioNTech, and mRNA 1273 among adults living in Florida was just uploaded to MedRivix, this preprint server. The study was headed by MIT professor and Florida Surgeon General, and it goes on from there. So we've got a lot of documents, a lot of information, a lot of developments here with Steve Kirsch, but wow. And then I want to budget some time in that we have left here with him, and we need to get him back again soon for longer, on Bill Gates and this attempt at a facelift, this relaunch, the lies that he's a philanthropist, blaming Trump and Doge and saying they're going to get us all killed with new viruses, not in the labs that he's helping create, but magically from the global warming, and saying that Elon Musk is a billionaire murdering poor people, when it's Bill Gates that's most famous for that. This is an attempt to in the minds of people, do a Jedi mind trick or gaslight and turn Elon into what he is. And then the constant threat, not just by him, but other spokespersons of the mad scientist death cult, like Tedros, the WHO, Hotez, Fauci, that if you cut the funding, why, the new virus is going to come get you. So clearly a big threat as well in branding the new virus we know they've got on the shelves to pick from, to be the fault of Trump and Musk. So big moves by some of the most hated and reviled people on earth, Bill Gates, to confuse people. I don't see it working, but it all ties together. So Steve Kirsch, thank you so much. Let's get right into this new study.
Sure. So this was a study actually that I instigated. So it's kind of my fault that this study happened. I found a very troubling differential mortality signal by looking at the Czech Republic data, which anybody can download that data. It's publicly available. It's record level data. And it's the first time that any country has ever exposed the record level data. And what that data showed was a differential mortality, a differential 1-year mortality, and it actually extends out more than a year. But I saw a differential mortality between the Pfizer shot and the Moderna shot. And so I let Joe Ladapo know that there's this differential mortality, and I suggested to him that he might want to look at the Florida data. And the reason that I chose Joe is because he's the only honest healthcare authority in the entire world. So if anyone was going to act on this, it was Joe. And
Joe, I remember
true
you when this came out, what was it, a year ago, 2 years ago, you said this is the best data out of the Czech Republic. And I remember you making a big deal about this, saying you were reaching out to the Surgeon General of Florida, and now I mean, this is huge. So thank God for the work you did on that.
Yeah, and thank God that Joe actually took me up on the offer, and he looked at his data, and he employed Recep Levy, professor, MIT professor, who did an absolutely spectacular job of analyzing the data. You know, they looked at 7 different parameters to match the groups, and so what they did is they said, you know, the people in Florida, there are a bunch of people in Florida who got the shots. Let's take 1.5 million of those people and try to match them together. Let's match 750,000 with 750,000 who took, you know, Pfizer 750,000 versus Moderna 750,000, and let's try to match them down to, ideally, they live on the same block that they got Pfizer or Moderna at in the same week at the same vaccination center. You know, and, you know, it's basically, they tried to make everything look the same in terms of matching these cohorts. And to some extent, these cohorts are matched better than what you would get in a randomized trial. So this is as good as it gets for an observational study. And there isn't an observational study in the history of epidemiology that matches on more parameters than what they matched on, or
so
that
you're
has
saying
more
this
perfect matching.
This is a gold standard or platinum standard study, and of course they rigged the other studies and tests, and you know
absolutely.
And so you were always looking to get a database to then put it together, and then because they really did just test this on the general public, now you found a state with a person of integrity, so you can go into the numbers with actually the mass trial they did on us as guinea pigs. We have the FDA board, remember, saying, oh, we don't know what this would do, so we just got to give it to kids to see what it does. So that, of course, just shows the lie that, quote, they tested all this. No, they tested it on the people in live time, and now with this study that you instigated and initiated, we actually have the smoking gun.
We do, because it showed that there was a 36% differential mortality between people who got the Pfizer shot versus people who got the Moderna shot. So if you got the Pfizer shot, you were 36% more likely to die from non-COVID reasons. Now, let me unpack that for a second, because there are a bunch of things. I'm talking about non-COVID all-cause mortality, and we're talking about differential mortality. And so most people, that is going to go like over their heads and like, what are you talking about? What does this mean? And so let me break it down for you. So the differential mortality means that compared to the non-COVID all-cause mortality of Moderna, that Pfizer was 36% higher than that in a year. And there shouldn't have been, those lines that you're showing on the screen, those lines should have been identical because the groups themselves were identical. And as you can see from the graphs, they started out identically and then they diverged. The Pfizer vaccine diverged, showing that the groups in fact were matched, but that the Pfizer group then somehow had higher mortality over time, and resulting in a 36% differential between the groups. Now, what's important to realize, and it's not brought out in the paper, is that vaccines in general, there has not been a vaccine that has ever reduced your non-disease all-cause mortality. In other words, vaccines aren't designed to make you live longer. The vaccines are only designed to take whatever risk you have from a particular disease and bring it down to ideally 0 for that disease. It's not designed to increase your lifespan. So that means that Moderna, which had we can assume that Moderna isn't increasing your lifespan. I don't know anybody who takes Moderna and is living longer. So let's give Moderna the benefit of the doubt. And let's say that Moderna doesn't increase your all-cause mortality at all. In other words, Moderna is perfectly safe.
Well, let me make this point. You're the scientist, but I'm a layperson. The reason Kennedy wants to bring placebo back that they've gotten rid of overall is because if they did this rollout and then had actually given, say, a third of the people a placebo, we would have the real floor. But now we don't know with the Moderna under the Pfizer because there's nothing to gauge it by with the placebo.
That is exactly right. I'm going to give you an honorary degree to be a scientist from that. That is exactly right. We do not have a placebo-controlled baseline because when people volunteer for these vaccination studies, they are fundamentally different from people who do not want to be vaccinated. And it turns out that people who are unvaccinated tend to have higher mortality. And that's not because they avoided the vaccine. It's just because, in general, people who don't get vaccinated just don't have as much access to health care. They may be in a lower socioeconomic status and so forth. But the statistics show that the unvaccinated are vastly different, even for the same age, than the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated.
But then we have the Amish that aren't vaccinated living longer than anybody on average.
Yeah, and
so they form a baseline. They form a baseline just in general, even though we don't have one because they don't do placebo.
They do, but without this placebo-controlled trial, you don't have a baseline. So our best thing is let's just assume for a moment that Moderna is perfectly safe. That's the best case. And what that means is that when you have a 36% differential between the two vaccines, it means that Pfizer increased your baseline all-cause mortality by at least 36%. Now, that is a disaster. No vaccine is supposed to increase your non-disease all-cause mortality. It's always supposed to decrease your disease mortality, but it's never supposed to increase your non-disease all-cause mortality.
So this is a signal. In Pfizer's case, I mean, this is a gigantic red alert, 1,000-alarm fire signal.
Correct. Absolutely. No question about it. There should not be a difference at all between these cohorts in terms of the non-COVID all-cause mortality.
So let me ask you this. I always heard, I know they did different base ingredients, but that Moderna and Pfizer were basically the same formula, and that Moderna had originally done it, and then Pfizer got a deal to do it, and then they just weren't as strong. It was equivalent to 3+ shots for Moderna versus Pfizer. But do we have any idea why, at least what was given in Florida, is so much worse than the Pfizer, than the Moderna?
Yeah, so you're correct in that Moderna had, when it was rolled out, they had over 3 times the dose of essentially the genetic material, the mRNA. If it was 3 times higher, is that a little bit more than 3 times higher for Moderna. And so you would think that if Moderna worked, then it would provide better protection, but it should also provide more death because it's got a higher dose. And, it's the more poison you give someone, the more death you're going to get. So this was a little bit surprising that we did see, in terms of a COVID mortality, we saw that Moderna was superior. In other words, Moderna is superior on the COVID mortality, and it's also superior on the non-COVID mortality. So if you're walking into a vaccination center and you're given the choice between Pfizer and Moderna, you'd be foolish. There's no data supporting your choice of Pfizer. Any intelligent consumer would say
But they also admit, and again, I'm just going from memory here, you're the expert, that they were, particularly Pfizer, was changing the base ingredients, and for a long time we didn't even know what was in it. So do we have any idea? Obviously, if it's got the same mRNA, just more of it in the Moderna, then that points towards, and I'm just deduction here, that it was one of the other ingredients in Pfizer.
Could be. We don't know. It could be the SV40 promoter, which is only found in the Pfizer vaccine. Probably not. Because when you look at the autopsy reports on people who got Pfizer versus people who got Moderna, you see the same sorts of effects happening in the in the histopathology slides, you can see this degradation of organs, of blood vessels, and so forth that are attacked by these so-called vaccines, and you can see the same sort of pattern whether you got the Moderna vaccine or the Pfizer vaccine.
And I know you don't like to speculate, but I mean, this is wild, and obviously there needs to be further investigations. What should that be? And then, I mean, how do they even try to roll out new COVID shots with this information, period?
Well, you know, they shouldn't until they get to the bottom of this. Now, it could very well be that Moderna was having manufacturing problems and the mRNA in the vials wasn't fully intact. And so mRNA could be shooting duds, but that's probably not true because when you look at the efficacy against COVID-19, Moderna had lower, so I probably shouldn't say that. Moderna had fewer deaths of COVID-19, but we don't know, in fact, that the vaccines were protective against COVID-19. So, in fact, Moderna could be shooting duds and is effectively a placebo because the mRNA was fragmented and was not protecting against COVID, and, of course, was then also not creating the antigen all over your body that Pfizer was. So it could very well be that Moderna was essentially shooting blanks.
And would that be because I remember Moderna was more of a startup, and so that's, I mean, I've
there's
seen...
no quality. There's no quality control in these shots. You don't know what you're getting. This is why they have these hot lots for these batches. I mean, that should never happen. So the quality control is lacking. And in fact, the EMA, when they looked at these vaccines, they said, well, you know, we looked at these mRNA fragments and we found that they're broken 50% of the time. And this is when they were applying for approval. They may have fixed the manufacturing process since then, but things can happen in terms of the storage requirements of the particular vaccine, the particular formulations. It's unknown as to why.
Sure, doesn't it degrade above 87 degrees?
Sure. I mean, they were initially, when they came out, they said, oh, it has to be kept at extremely low temperature because mRNA is extremely fragile.
Bottom line, it was a giant mass experiment.
It was, and it's still an ongoing mass experiment. And apparently, President Trump doesn't want to stop it, because he feels very proud that he was responsible for Operation Warp Speed. And so he does not want these vaccines to be taken off the market because that would be a blemish on his accomplishment. And that is tragic because we are giving these vaccines to kids, and that is unfathomable.
That's right. I mean, this is the big thing Trump does that is the big problem with him. And I've seen... And I talk about behind the scenes, and of course, you have more context than I do. A lot of internal fighting, almost schizophrenic or paradoxical, where Kennedy's trying to block this, get placebos, trying to block the rollouts. Just a few months ago, they were trying to bring out a new one, and he said no, but now they say they are. What's the latest on that?
Man, it's like watching a ping pong match because they're looking at, what variants should we target in the latest mRNA vaccines? And, while at the same time you're talking about stopping it, well, if you're stopping it in kids, why aren't you stopping it in adults? The harms in the autopsy they're clearly killing people. Vaccines should never kill people. That's the thing. And we have the autopsy evidence. We have the histopathology.
Yeah, you've laid that out, all the papers and all the documents has all been confirmed accurate because you're a statistician, really, and one of the best, in my view, watching your work. That we've never seen a signal anywhere near this of hurting people. And we have the famous video that leaked of Kennedy talking to Trump a year ago. Trump's like, yeah, they're giving too much to kids, maybe not the kids. So we see in Trump's action, okay, don't give it to kids, but it helps old people. He's still been convinced of this crap.
No, you can't. You cannot give old people a vaccine which kills them. Okay, and this is what's happening. You can see it in the autopsies, and also the BMJ published a report. It was done by the Norwegian Health Authority. Norwegian Health Authority basically investigated 100 deaths after vaccination, and they discovered that at least 10% were likely caused by the vaccine, and up to 36% of the deaths were it could have been caused by the vaccine. So we knew very early. It was published in the BMG by this independent investigation. And ever since then, there has never been any country that has looked at these people who die after getting the vaccine to understand what they died from. Now, the CDC claims that they have all these thousands of cases, but the CDC basically says that there have been 0 deaths from the mRNA vaccines. The only deaths are 10 deaths from non-mRNA vaccines, and we stopped those. The CDC has seen no deaths. Look, it is very obvious. I mean, you don't have to be an expert pathologist to look at these histopathology slides and see there's something very, very wrong here.
Well, I've seen a number. You have 400,000 deaths caused by the shots in the U.S. alone?
The estimate, based on a number of factors. I mean, there is a great study done by Andre Reddert. He looked at 30 European countries, over 500 million in population, and he discovered what's called a vaccine dose fatality rate that at a minimum is 0.5%, which means that basically we killed 1 out of 1,000 people who got the shots, or 1 out of 1,000 shots led to death. So if you shoot 660 million doses of these shots, you're going to kill 660,000 Americans from these shots. So that's what his research shows. Now, it turns out that if you impute a vaccine dose fatality rate based on the numbers in the Latipo study, you get the same number. You get the 0.15%. So you take
and people don't know, in big, giants, totally separate studies, when you start getting the exact same finding, you've hit the facts. Steve Kirsch, incredible. Stay there. I want to come back and talk about what do we do? I mean, why doesn't Trump draft the Surgeon General of Florida up there instead of this woman he tried to put forward that got shot down yesterday? Let's talk about that when we come back. Well, the Surgeon General of Florida is a hero. And, DeSantis hadn't been perfect, but on that front, he hit a home run. And you contrast this to the lady who was a big pharma deep stater that Trump put forward as a Surgeon General. He got exposed by RFK Jr.'s experts, Nicole Shanahan and others. And Laura Loomer exposed it, and Trump withdrew her. But it's a real ping pong match, a real tug of war going on. And when Trump gets presented with the facts enough, he does the right thing most of the time. But this has got a real blind spot when it comes to mRNA. We see Larry Ellison there the first week Trump's back in office going, oh, we'll cure cancer in 48 hours. I mean, mRNA, it's wonderful. And we've just seen this unmitigated disaster. We've got Bill Gates trying to reconstitute like Sauron, trying to find the ring, blaming Elon Musk, saying Elon Musk is the murderer of the third world by cutting off Bill Gates's Frankenscience guinea pigging operations, cutting the money off. It's just wild. So Steve Kirsch, you being the initiator of this, and God bless you for that, what needs to be done now in your view, and what other big stories are you out there like Merlin, behind the scenes getting launched?
Well, I think what needs to be done at a minimum, the FDA should be asking Pfizer to respond to the Latipo study. New York Times ought to be asking Pfizer, hey, this looks pretty bad for you. What's going on here? How do you respond to this? And I know of one semi-mainstream journalist that has reached out to Pfizer for comment on the Latipo study. And the comment came back as nothing. They basically are ignoring it. They don't want to talk about it. And that alone should tell you something. So, the most conservative thing is to say is to simply go to Pfizer and say, hey, well, you think there's something wrong with this study that we should know about because this looks pretty incriminating. This is like, you got your finger on the trigger here, and you're causing 36% higher deaths. What's going on? They should be allowed to give an opportunity to explain that. Like, explain it like you have a week to explain it to us. Otherwise, we're going to take you off the market. But if it were me, I would take it off the market in the meantime. I would take it off the market immediately.
Now, you said that years ago with the studies and research. It might be a good time to recap. There's so many.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, so many other smoking gun studies and databases and as you said, that keeps confirming these numbers.
Oh, yeah. We knew immediately after the shots rolled out, the VAERS system, which is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, this is the system that tracks these, that the CDC says if something bad happens to you, you should report it to VAERS. And so that system was lighting up like a Christmas tree. VAERS went from basically a flat line of nothing happening, and then all of a sudden, this huge blip in terms of never seen anything like this before in history in terms of people reporting deaths. Now, the medical community says, oh, well, that's because it's an EUA vaccine and they're required to report deaths happening after the vaccine is given. But no, they're required to report deaths even before that requirement for any vaccine. So this is just unprecedented, the numbers. And they have this thing called proportional reporting ratios, PRR, and that's their way of assessing safety signals. And it compares a single vaccine against the rates reported for that particular condition versus other vaccines. Percentage of deaths. How is the percentage of deaths in these reports compared to other vaccines? And they had 770 different safety signals that triggered. In other words, 770 different adverse events triggering safety signals. That has never happened before in the history of the CDC. So they knew there was a fire drill. And so what the CDC did is they basically covered it up and they said nothing to the public. They talked about myocarditis as saying, well, it's rare and don't worry. But they never talked about the other 769 safety signals. And the only way we even found out about that is because somebody sent a Freedom of Information Act request to the CDC and they complied with it and they showed us the reports and they showed that 770 safety signals have been triggered. And yet the CDC didn't say a word to the American public. Now, I have never heard so many stories of vaccine deaths. I have never seen, just like you rolled the B-roll ahead of this with all of these athletes dying, with people dying, with people at podiums speaking, and then they're speaking like this and suddenly they just cave over. We have never seen anything like that before.
And then we had the FDA in October of 2020 predicting publicly what would happen. Why do you think they did that?
Well, I think that was I think you're talking about a slide presentation.
Yes, it's on screen,
that slide presentation. And they quickly went through that slide presentation. But what was on that slide presentation is basically causes of death from other vaccines. And so that's possible adverse events because you've seen those adverse events from other vaccines in the past. It's not necessarily saying that you're going to see these here, but in fact, we saw everything that's on this list.
At a higher statistic we've ever seen before.
Yeah. So it's like people are just turning a blind eye to all this stuff. And the thing that's really, really troubling, Alex, is the lack of autopsies. Like and especially where was the autopsies in the clinical trials themselves? So people died, more people died. I mean, the all-cause mortality was higher in the people who got the vaccine than the people who got the placebo. So why didn't they investigate with full autopsies on the people who died after vaccination? There were no autopsies for anyone who died after vaccination in the trials. So the investigator said, well, we don't think it was caused by the shots. And the FDA just like eats it up, doesn't require any validation.
And then they
doesn't
go all over the
require
news and say,
autopsies.
safe and effective. If you have the shot, you can't get sick and you can't spread it. And then we have, when they approved it for kids, saying, we don't know what it'll do. Well, we just got to put them in them to see what happens. And then meanwhile, they're still out there saying, oh, no, we tested it all. It's all been tested. And then when they do test it by giving it to people, they try to suppress and cover it up.
That's right. It's very, very troubling, all of this stuff. There is no investigations. Nobody's calling for autopsies. It is just horrible what is happening here.
Well, Steve, you sent me a few other things, and I just want to hit them briefly here. Vaccinations or verifications of mRNA vaccine DNA contamination in the world. And you were raising alarm early on. Now there's all these studies confirming that these things are doing that. For people that don't know, you mix in DNA with these shots, and then it does all sorts of weird stuff when they're having autoimmune responses and stuff in the body. And then all this SV40 contamination and cancer virus, and they say it isn't, but it is. What's going on here?
Well, clearly the shots have DNA contamination, and clearly the DNA contamination is above the levels that the regulators set for being safe. And we can play games with the definition, but the point is that there is a lot of extra junk in these vials that are being injected into people's bodies that we have no clue as to what the repercussions are in the short term or the long term.
And we had Bill Gates, when this was all rolling out, saying, we have no idea with this mRNA. We just shoot it right in the kids' veins. And then we've got the FDA meeting where they approve it going, we have no idea. And then you and I are the conspiracy theorists for pointing this out.
Yes, it's kind of an upside down world here where we're the conspiracy theorists and we're pointing out all of the safety issues with these vaccines. And gosh, you don't have to be a critical thinker to realize that, wow, there have been no autopsies and there's no histopathology on any of these. And when they do the autopsies, which were done, there were about 80 or 85 autopsies done in Germany for people who got the shots. And those autopsies showed very clearly that the vaccines were responsible for people's deaths. And the organ damage and the vascular damage was horrendous in these people who died. Those things just don't happen spontaneously. I mean, these are like very rare events. If you saw one autopsy, you'd say, "Wow, this is very rare." But when you then look at 5 autopsies in a row, you say, "Whoa, we're seeing the same very rare thing in all of these autopsies." And yet the CDC is completely blind to all this. They're not doing any autopsies.
Well, we're going to have to see what Kennedy does about this, but this is really pissing people off. Finally, today the FDA announced that May 22nd, the FDA's Vaccine and Related Biological Products Advisory Committee will meet to publicly discuss and make recommendations on the selection of the 2025-2026 formula for COVID-19 vaccines, which it's not. So they're trying to barrel ahead of this. And I see Kennedy, trying to shoot it down. This is crazy.
It is. It's insane. This is like rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. That's essentially what they're doing. They're saying, "Hey, what's the best deck chair arrangement for us while this ship is sinking?" People are dying from these shots. There's no doubt about it. I've never seen anything like this in my lifetime, and I think neither of you. And it's just so troubling, and it's only happening to the vaccinated. I have a friend who had about 15 people who died unexpectedly that he knows, and before the shots rolled out, he'd know one person in his life that died unexpectedly. After the vaccines rolled out, he had 17 of his friends die unexpectedly, and all of them were from the vaccine, and 4 of them died on the same day that they got the shots, and 3 of the 4 were under 30. This is statistically impossible if the shots are helping people. And in nursing homes like Apple Valley Village Nursing Home, I got a report from someone who worked there saying that, hey, before they rolled out the shots, they had no COVID deaths in their nursing home at all. They had 27 COVID cases, no COVID deaths. After they rolled out the shots, they had 90 COVID cases. Then this is with 3 weeks after the shot. They had 90 COVID cases and 30 deaths. So the death rate went up from 0 out of 27, and it went up to 30 out of 90 COVID
Total
cases.
insanity.
That stuff just doesn't happen.
You don't need to be a weatherman to know which way the wind's blowing, and you can see this is mass murder. Dr. Kirsch, Steve Kirsch, thank you so much for being with us. Please keep giving us updates, and God bless you.
Thank you.